Get off my bus. You stink. You're not riding up here with decent people. Gary Hollister grabbed the man by the collar of his faded t-shirt and shoved him toward the back, his knuckles white against the charcoal fabric. The man did not resist. He did not raise his voice. He did not even lift his hands. He just looked at the driver with eyes so calm and so deeply sad that 3 passengers would later say it haunted them for weeks. The driver had no idea. He had absolutely no idea that the man he was dragging down the aisle like garbage was Keanu Reeves. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you absolutely cannot miss. The number 7 bus pulled away from the Sunset Boulevard stop at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning, its brakes groaning like an old man getting out of bed. Los Angeles was already baking under an early sun that turned the sidewalks into griddles and the air into something you could chew. The bus was 3/4 full. Office workers with lanyards around their necks. A mother with a stroller jammed between 2 seats. College students with earbuds and dead eyes. The ordinary parade of a city that never stops moving but rarely goes anywhere meaningful. Keanu Reeves boarded at the corner of Sunset and Vine. He dropped exact change into the fare box, the coins clinking one after the other, and nodded politely to the driver. He wore what he always wore. Faded blue jeans with a small tear above the left knee. A plain charcoal gray t-shirt that had been washed so many times it was almost translucent at the shoulders. Scuffed black motorcycle boots. His dark hair fell to his shoulders with a few silver strands catching the fluorescent bus light, and his 3-day stubble made him look like someone who slept on benches rather than in houses. His motorcycle was in the shop. A busted clutch cable. He could have called a car service. He could have asked his manager to send someone. Instead, he walked 3 blocks to the bus stop and waited in line like everyone else, because that is who Keanu Reeves has always been. He made his way to an open seat near the front, 4th row on the left side, and sat down. He placed a small leather duffel bag between his feet, pulled a worn paperback from the side pocket, and opened it to a dog-eared page. The title was barely visible. A collection of poems by Rainer Maria Rilke. For exactly 90 seconds, nothing happened. The bus merged into traffic. A teenager near the back played music too loudly from his phone. The mother with the stroller shushed her baby. Los Angeles carried on. Then Gary Hollister looked in the rearview mirror. Gary was 52 years old. He had driven the number 7 route for 18 years. His hair was salt and pepper cropped short, military style, though the military was a lifetime ago. His face was weathered in the way faces get when they spend decades clenching against things they cannot control. Deep grooves ran from his nose to the corners of his mouth. His eyes, once a bright blue, had faded to the color of dishwater. He wore his transit uniform the way a soldier wears armor, not with pride, but with grim necessity. 18 years on the number 7. 18 years of people who did not say thank you, who left trash under seats, who cursed at him when he was 3 minutes late because traffic on La Brea was backed up to Wilshire, who treated him like furniture with a steering wheel. His wife Diane had left him 14 months ago, not for another man, for peace, she said, which was worse because it meant that living with Gary was the opposite of peace. His daughter Megan, 24, had stopped returning his calls 3 years ago after an argument about something so stupid Gary could not even remember what it was. He remembered the silence afterward, though. 3 years of it. A silence so loud it filled every room in his empty apartment. Gary looked in the rearview mirror and saw a man in a dirty t-shirt sitting in the 4th row. Not a passenger. A problem. The kind of problem Gary had been dealing with for 18 years. The vagrants, the drifters, the ones who smelled like the street and turned his bus into a shelter on wheels. He pulled the bus to the curb between stops, the hydraulics hissing as the vehicle lurched to a halt. Passengers swayed and grabbed at poles. "Hey," Gary called out, his voice carrying the sharp bark of a man who had stopped asking politely years ago. "You, 4th row." Keanu looked up from his book. His brown eyes settled on the driver with quiet attention. "Yeah," Gary said, standing from his seat, one hand still on the steering wheel. You cannot sit there. Front section is for regular passengers. Keanu closed his book, keeping his finger between the pages to hold his place. I pay my fare, he said. His voice was low and even. I do not care what you paid. You're not sitting up here. You go to the back or you get off. Your choice. The bus fell silent. The teenager stopped his music. The mother pulled her baby closer. A woman in scrubs near the window lowered her phone to watch. Keanu looked at Gary for a long moment. Not with anger, not with defiance, with something closer to recognition. As if he had seen this moment before, not directed at him, but at others, and understood it the way a person understands weather. It comes. You stand in it. You wait. I will stay where I am, Keanu said quietly. Gary's face reddened. The color started at his neck and climbed upward like mercury in a thermometer. What did you just say to me? I pay my fare. I will sit where I am. Listen, pal. Gary stepped out from behind the driver's partition, his boots heavy on the rubber floor. I have been driving this bus for 18 years. I know who belongs on it and who does not. And you, he jabbed a finger toward Keanu, do not belong up here. You are scaring my passengers. You smell. You look like you have not showered in a week. Now move. A young woman named Sophie Bennett, 17 years old with a messy ponytail and a backpack covered in pins, pulled out her phone and began recording. She held it low, near her lap, the camera lens tilted upward to capture both the driver and the man in the fourth row. A middle-aged woman in hospital scrubs, Denise Harmon, looked up from her phone. She had just finished a 12-hour night shift at Cedars-Sinai and was heading home to a hot shower and 4 hours of sleep before she did it all again. She watched the driver bark at a passenger who was doing nothing but reading and felt something tighten in her chest. She had seen this before, not on a bus, in emergency rooms. The way some nurses spoke to patients who came in wearing the wrong clothes. The way doctors sometimes treated people differently depending on their insurance. The assumption that appearance equals worth. It was everywhere. She just never expected to see it so raw, so undisguised on a Tuesday morning bus. A college student, barely 20, wearing a UCLA sweatshirt, looked up from his textbook. He glanced at the man in the fourth row, then at the driver, then back at the man. He opened his phone's camera and held it at an angle, pretending to text. Keanu did not move. He did not raise his voice. He simply sat with the paperback in his hand and the duffel bag between his boots, occupying his space with the quiet certainty of someone who understood that dignity is not something you argue for. It is something you demonstrate. I'm going to ask you one more time, Gary said, his voice dropping to something between a warning and a threat. Get to the back of this bus. Now. No. The word was so simple. One syllable. 2 letters. But it landed in the bus like a stone dropped into still water. Every passenger felt the ripple. Gary grabbed the radio from his console. Dispatch, this is Route 7. I have a non-compliant passenger. Requesting security at my current location, Sunset near Highland. He is refusing to move, and I cannot continue the route. He dropped the radio and turned back to Keanu, his jaw set. You want to play this game? Fine. We will sit right here until they drag you off. The bus idled at the curb. The engine hummed. The air conditioning rattled. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man in a business suit, Martin Caldwell, 55, silver-haired, briefcase balanced on his knees, cleared his throat. Driver, the man paid his fare. There is no reason he cannot sit there. Gary spun toward him. Did I ask for your opinion? Mind your own business. This is my business, Martin replied, his voice calm but firm. I ride this bus every day. That man is not bothering anyone. He is bothering me, Gary snapped. Tyler Morrison, 25, sitting across the aisle from Keanu, held up his phone. The red recording light was visible. Man, you're going to want to rethink this. Whole thing is going online. Gary glared at him. Put that away. You cannot record me. Actually, I can, Tyler said. Public transit. Public space. No expectation of privacy. I looked it up. Gary's hands clenched. His breathing came in short, sharp bursts. The control he had maintained for 18 years, the control that kept him from screaming at passengers, from slamming on the brakes, from driving the bus into the Pacific Ocean, was cracking. Every slight, every insult, every passenger who treated him like he was invisible. It was all rising to the surface, and the man in the dirty t-shirt had become the target for 18 years of accumulated rage. "You people do not understand," Gary muttered, returning to his seat. "I deal with this every single day. The homeless, the druggies, the ones who pass out in the back, and I have to clean up their mess. Nobody cares. Nobody says thank you. And now you want to tell me who gets to sit where on my bus?" A woman near the back, Rachel Cooper, 30 years old, holding her baby son against her chest, spoke softly. "He is just sitting there. He is reading a book." "Shut up," Gary barked. "All of you just shut up and let me do my job." The baby started crying. Rachel bounced him gently, her face tight with stress. Sophie, the teenager with the phone, stood up halfway from her seat. "You cannot talk to people like that," she said. Her voice was trembling, but she said it anyway. "Sit down," Gary roared. The bus fell into a terrible silence. The kind of silence that happens when something is about to break. Keanu sat motionless through all of it. His book was still in his hand. His eyes were focused on a point somewhere beyond the windshield, beyond the traffic, beyond this moment. He had learned something most people never learn: that the loudest person in the room is never the strongest. That patience is not weakness. That silence in the right hands is the most powerful thing in the world. He had been here before, not on a bus, not in this exact situation, but in the space where someone decides you're less, where someone looks at your clothes, your hair, your face, and draws a conclusion that has nothing to do with who you actually are. Every human being knows this space. Keanu just knew it better than most. 7 minutes passed, then 8. The passengers grew restless. Through the windows, pedestrians on Sunset Boulevard glanced at the idling bus with mild curiosity. A car behind them honked twice and then pulled around. Then something happened that Gary Hollister did not see coming. An elderly woman named Dorothy Prescott, 78 years old, white-haired, wearing a lavender cardigan and orthopedic shoes, had been sitting quietly in the second row. She had boarded 2 stops before Keanu. She had watched the entire confrontation in silence, her hands folded on top of her patent leather purse. She had been studying the man in the 4th row with increasing intensity, her eyes narrowing, her lips moving slightly as if working through a memory. Now she stood, slowly, carefully, using the pole for balance. "Young man," she said, her voice thin but clear as a bell. She was looking at Gary. "Young man, do you know who that is?" Gary turned, his irritation spiking. "Ma'am, please sit down." "That is Keanu Reeves," Dorothy said. She pointed a slightly trembling finger at the man in the 4th row. "I have seen every movie that man has made since 1989. My late husband Frank loved him in that fishing movie. We watched it every anniversary." She turned to the rest of the bus. "He is one of the most famous actors in the world. And you," she turned back to Gary, her voice gaining an edge that 78 years of living had sharpened to a point, "are treating him like he is nothing." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before. This one had weight. Massachusetts. The kind of silence that precedes an avalanche. Tyler Morrison lowered his phone for a moment, then raised it again, wider, capturing every face. Sophie Bennett gasped audibly. Martin Caldwell leaned forward in his seat, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. Rachel Cooper's hand went to her mouth. Gary Hollister stared at Dorothy, then at Keanu, then back at Dorothy. "That is not," he started. "He does not look like." "He does not look like what?" Dorothy interrupted. "Like what you expected. Like someone famous should look? That is rather the problem, is it not?" Keanu had not moved. His expression had not changed. He did not stand. He did not announce himself. He did not pull out a phone to prove who he was. He simply sat in the 4th row of the number 7 bus, a paperback in his hand, and let the moment be what it was. Because the moment was never about him. It was about every person who had ever been told they did not belong because of how they looked. And whether that person was a movie star or a dishwasher or a man sleeping under a bridge, the injustice was exactly the same. The phones were everywhere now. Every passenger who had one had it raised. The teenager in the back, the college students, the woman in scrubs, even Martin Caldwell, who had never posted anything on social media in his life, held up his phone and pressed record. Gary's face went through a rapid sequence of transformations. Confusion became recognition. Recognition became disbelief. Disbelief became something much worse. The slow, crawling realization that every word he had spoken, every insult, every bark, every "you do not belong here," was now preserved on dozens of devices that would upload to the internet before the bus reached its next stop. His radio crackled. Route 7, security is en route. ETA, 4 minutes. Gary did not pick up the radio. He stood in the aisle, frozen, as the weight of what he had done settled on his shoulders like a physical thing. "Oh God," he whispered. The security officers arrived 6 minutes later. Two of them, Daniel Brooks and James Whitfield. They boarded the bus, expecting a routine, non-compliant passenger situation. What they found was a bus full of people recording, a driver who looked like he had seen a ghost, and a man in the fourth row reading poetry. "What is the situation here?" Officer Brooks asked. Gary opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The words that had flowed so easily minutes ago, the commands, the insults, the authority, had evaporated. He stood in the aisle with his mouth open and his hands hanging at his sides, and said nothing. Tyler Morrison spoke first. The driver demanded this man move to the back of the bus because of how he looks. Called him homeless. Told him he did not belong. "The man is Keanu Reeves." Officer Brooks looked at Keanu, then at Gary, then back at Keanu. "Sir," Brooks said to Keanu, "are you all right?" "I am fine," Keanu said. "Thank you for asking." He grabbed his collar earlier. Sophie called out from her seat, her phone still recording. "I got it on video." He shoved him toward the back. Officer Brooks turned to Gary. His expression had shifted from neutral to serious. "Is that true? Did you put your hands on this passenger?" Gary's mouth moved. No sound came out. "I have it on video," Tyler confirmed. The whole thing, from when he first told him to move. Officer Whitfield approached Gary. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step off the bus. We need to have a conversation." Gary Hollister, who had driven the number 7 bus for 18 years, who had never missed a shift, who had built his entire identity around the thin authority of a driver's seat and a schedule, stepped off his bus for the last time. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The morning sunlight hit his face, and he squinted, disoriented, as if he had been underground for a very long time. The officers escorted him to the side of the road. A replacement driver was called. Inside the bus, the passengers erupted into noise. Voices overlapping. Phones being checked. Tyler already posting the first clip. Keanu remained in his seat. He had not moved through any of it. He opened his book again and found his page. Dorothy Prescott, still standing with one hand on the pole, looked at him with the soft expression of a woman who had seen many things in 78 years and could still be surprised by one of them. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "my Frank would have been very proud of you today." Keanu looked up at her and smiled. A small, quiet smile that did not ask for anything. "Thank you, Dorothy. How did you know my name?" He pointed gently to the small gold name pin on her cardigan, the one she had forgotten she was wearing. Dorothy laughed. It was the kind of laugh that fills a room without trying, and for a brief moment, the tension on the bus dissolved into something warmer. The replacement driver arrived 20 minutes later. A woman named Linda Prescott, no relation to Dorothy, 40 years old, with steady hands and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She climbed aboard, scanned the faces of the passengers, and settled into the driver's seat. "Sorry for the delay, everyone," she said. "Let us get you where you need to go." The bus pulled away from the curb and merged back into the Los Angeles traffic. Keanu read his poems. Dorothy settled into her seat and closed her eyes. Tyler Morrison posted his video. By the time the bus reached its next stop, The footage had already been viewed 80,000 times. By noon, it was 4 million. By evening, it was 37 million. The internet did what the internet does. It amplified, it distorted, it sanctified, it condemned. The videos spread across every platform in the country within hours. Multiple angles, multiple recordings. Tyler Morrison's footage, which captured the confrontation from start to finish, was the most watched. But Sophie Bennett's recording, shot from below, catching the moment Gary grabbed Keanu's collar in sharp detail, became the most shared. The contrast was devastating. On one side, a bus driver in a transit uniform, face twisted with contempt, hand fisted in the collar of a faded t-shirt, dragging a passenger toward the back of the bus. On the other side, the passenger, still, silent, eyes not angry but sad. The saddest eyes anyone had ever seen on a public bus in Los Angeles. And that passenger was Keanu Reeves. Think pieces erupted like brush fires. The number 7 bus and the myth of who belongs. Why Keanu Reeves' silence spoke louder than any speech. A bus driver, a movie star, and a quiet crisis of American dignity. Every cable news network, every podcast, every morning show had an opinion. But the detail that broke the internet was not the confrontation. It was what happened 2 hours after the bus incident, captured by a security camera outside a convenience store on Hollywood Boulevard. Keanu Reeves, still in his faded t-shirt and torn jeans, walked out of the convenience store carrying 2 coffees and a paper bag. A homeless man was sitting on the sidewalk outside, his back against the wall, a cardboard sign in his lap. His name was Wallace. He was 63 years old. He had been a high school math teacher for 21 years before a series of events, divorce, medical bills, a house fire with no insurance, had placed him on that sidewalk. Keanu did not walk past. He did not speed up. He did not pretend Wallace was invisible the way hundreds of other people had that morning. He sat down, right on the concrete, cross-legged like a kid at a campfire. He handed Wallace one of the coffees and the paper bag, which contained 2 turkey sandwiches and a bottle of water. Wallace looked at him with the startled expression of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. They talked for 15 minutes. Wallace told Keanu about his years as a teacher, about a student named Derek who could not do fractions to save his life, but could draw birds so real they looked like they might fly off the paper, about the house fire that took everything, including the drawing Derek had given him on the last day of school, about the shelter bed that was never available and the VA office that put him on a waiting list for a waiting list. Keanu listened to every word. He did not check his phone. He did not look at his watch. He listened the way Wallace's students used to listen during his best lessons, with full attention and no agenda. Then Keanu looked down at Wallace's feet. They were bare, cracked and blistered. The shoes Wallace had been wearing had been stolen 3 nights ago while he slept. Keanu unlaced his motorcycle boots. Black leather, scuffed and worn but solid. Boots that had carried him through film sets and motorcycle trips and city streets for years. He set them beside Wallace's bare feet. They might be a little big, Keanu said. Wallace stared at the boots, then at Keanu, then at the boots again. I cannot take your shoes, man. They are not my shoes anymore, Keanu said. He stood up in his socks, his feet on the warm Hollywood sidewalk, and picked up his duffel bag. They are yours. He walked away. A security camera mounted above the convenience store entrance captured every second. The footage showed a man in socks walking down Hollywood Boulevard, his duffel bag over his shoulder, stepping carefully around broken glass and gum, completely unbothered by the fact that he had no shoes. That footage, placed beside Gary Hollister's snarling declaration that Keanu did not belong on the front of a city bus, became the most shared image on the internet for 4 consecutive days. 91 million views. The man who a bus driver said did not deserve to sit in the front had given his boots to a stranger who had no shoes at all. While the world raged, Keanu Reeves went home to his modest house in the Hollywood Hills. He fed his dog. He made pasta. He called his friend and manager Tom Whitfield and asked him explicitly and firmly to make sure no lawsuit was filed against Gary Hollister. Tom protested. The assault was on video. The case was airtight. Gary could be charged criminally, and the transit authority could be sued for millions. I do not want that, Keanu said. Keanu, the man grabbed you. I know what he did. I do not want to destroy him. The internet is already destroying him. Then the internet does not need my help. Tom was quiet for a moment. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Keanu hung up, turned off his phone, and spent the rest of the evening on his back porch, watching the sun set over the canyon, the sky turning from gold to copper to the deep bruised purple of a Los Angeles twilight. His dog, a rescue mutt named Biscuit, lay across his feet. He thought about the bus driver, not with anger, with something closer to curiosity. He had seen the man's eyes in that moment before the grab. Not hatred, pain, the kind of pain that turns outward because there is nowhere else for it to go. Gary Hollister was not a monster. He was a man who had been broken by something and had never learned how to put the pieces back together. Keanu knew about broken pieces. He knew about losing people. He knew about waking up in an empty house and not knowing who you were supposed to be that day. He knew about the distance between the person the world sees and the person who sits alone at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning. He scratched Biscuit behind the ears and went to bed. Gary Hollister did not sleep that night, or the next night, or the night after that. He sat in his apartment in Van Nuys, a one-bedroom unit with water stains on the ceiling and a television that was always on because the silence was too loud without it. The television showed his face. Every channel, his transit uniform, his contorted expression, his hand on Keanu's collar, played and replayed in an endless loop of humiliation. His phone buzzed constantly. Calls from numbers he did not recognize. Reporters, producers, people who wanted to yell at him. People who wanted him to yell back on camera so they could make money from his anger. His supervisor called to inform him he was suspended pending investigation. His union representative called to tell him the union could only do so much. An old friend from the military called and hung up without saying anything. On the second night, Gary opened a bottle of whiskey and sat on the floor of his kitchen and watched the video on his phone. Not the news coverage, the original video. Tyler Morrison's footage. He watched it 17 times. Each time he watched, he noticed something new. The first few times, he saw himself. His red face, his jabbing finger, his voice, which sounded nothing like what he heard inside his own head. Inside his head, his voice was reasonable, firm, the voice of a man in charge. On the video, his voice was the voice of a bully, high and tight and ugly. On the fifth viewing, he noticed the passengers. Sophie Bennett's wide eyes, the mother pulling her child closer. Martin Caldwell's jaw tightening. The college student in the UCLA sweatshirt slowly raising his phone. Denise Harmon in her scrubs, shaking her head so slightly it was almost imperceptible. On the ninth viewing, he noticed Dorothy, the elderly woman in the lavender cardigan. She had been watching him the entire time with an expression he could not name. Not anger, not fear, disappointment, as if she had expected better from him and was genuinely surprised that he had fallen so short. On the 14th viewing, he noticed something he had missed every time before, a small detail that would stay with him for the rest of his life. When Gary grabbed Keanu's collar and began pulling him toward the back of the bus, Keanu's hand had instinctively moved to protect his book. Not himself, his book, the worn paperback of poetry. As Gary dragged him, Keanu held that book against his chest the way a parent holds a child, the way a person holds the thing they love most. A man whose collar was being grabbed by an angry stranger, and his first instinct was to protect a book of poems. On the 18th viewing, he stopped looking at himself. He started looking at Keanu. At the moment Gary grabbed his collar, Keanu's face filled the screen. And the expression on that face was not what Gary expected. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was not contempt. It was sadness. Deep, unmistakable, personal sadness. As if the man in the faded t-shirt was not thinking about himself at all. As if he was thinking about Gary. As if he could see, in that single violent moment, every wound that Gary carried. Every empty room, every unreturned phone call. Gary set the phone down. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. He had not cried in 4 years. Not when Diane left. Not when Megan stopped calling. Not when he realized at some unmarked point that his life had become something he endured rather than lived. But now, on the kitchen floor of his Van Nuys apartment, with a bottle of whiskey and a phone full of hate, Gary Hollister cried. Not because he had been caught. Not because his career was over. Because he looked at the face of the man he had grabbed and saw what he had become. A man who hurt people because he was hurting. A man who pushed others down because he had forgotten how to stand up. A man who looked at a stranger reading poetry on a bus and saw a threat instead of a human being. The tears came in waves. Ugly, racking, the kind that leave you hollowed out like a building after a fire. On the third morning, Gary found himself driving to a place he had not planned to visit. He had heard, through the noise of the internet, that Keanu Reeves was often seen at a small coffee shop on Franklin Avenue. A place called Rosewood Coffee. Oak tables. Mismatched chairs. The kind of place where nobody bothers anyone. Gary parked his truck across the street and sat for 40 minutes, trying to talk himself out of going in. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles turned white. Twice he reached for the ignition to leave. Twice something stopped him. He walked through the door at 9:22 in the morning. The coffee shop was half full. A barista with tattoos and a nose ring worked behind the counter. Two women with laptops occupied a corner table. A man read a newspaper by the window. And in the back, at a small table against the exposed brick wall, Keanu Reeves sat alone with a cup of black coffee and the same worn paperback. He wore a clean version of the same outfit. Dark t-shirt, jeans, boots. His hair was tied back loosely. The thin woven bracelet on his left wrist caught a beam of morning light. Gary stood in the doorway. Every cell in his body told him to turn around, to leave, to go back to his apartment and his whiskey and the slow collapse of his life. But his feet carried him forward. He stopped 3 steps from Keanu's table. His throat was dry. His hands were shaking. "Mr. Reeves." Keanu looked up. His brown eyes settled on Gary with the same quiet attention he had shown on the bus. "No surprise. No hostility. Just presence." "I know who you are," Keanu said simply. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Gary did not sit. Not yet. He stood there, a 52-year-old man in a wrinkled flannel shirt, unshaven, with 3 days of sleeplessness carved into his face, and tried to find words that were big enough for what he needed to say. "I came to apologize," Gary said. His voice cracked on the second word. "Sit down," Keanu said. Gary sat. His hands rested on the table, then moved to his lap, then back to the table. He could not find a place for them. He noticed that Keanu's coffee cup was nearly empty, that the paperback on the table had a bookmark made from a movie ticket stub, that the woven bracelet on Keanu's wrist was frayed and faded, the kind of thing a person wears not because it is valuable, but because it means something. Small details. The kind of details Gary had stopped noticing about people years ago. "I do not even know where to start," Gary said. Keanu waited. He did not fill the silence. He did not rush. He simply sat across the table from a man who had grabbed him by the collar on a public bus and gave him the thing that Gary had denied him 3 days ago. Space. Patience. The quiet dignity of being treated like a person. The barista brought 2 glasses of water, setting them down gently, sensing the weight of the conversation without knowing its contents. She retreated behind the counter. The coffee shop continued around them like a river flowing around 2 stones. "Everything is falling apart," Gary continued. His voice was barely above a whisper. "My job is gone. My ex-wife called to tell me she was right to leave. My buddies from the service will not answer my phone." He paused. "And my daughter." He stopped. The word daughter seemed to take something out of him physically. "My daughter saw the video," he managed. "She has not spoken to me in 3 years. 3 years. And now the first thing she sees of her father is this." He pressed his fist against his mouth. "I am on every screen in the country being the worst version of myself." Keanu listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer platitudes. He did not say it is okay because it was not okay. He simply listened the way a person listens when they understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is let them hear their own words. What I did to you on that bus, Gary said, looking directly at Keanu for the first time. It was not about you. I know that now. You were just sitting there, reading. You were not bothering anyone. His voice broke again. You were just a man on a bus. And I turned you into something else because I needed someone to be angry at. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. 18 years on that route. 18 years of people treating me like I am invisible. Like I am a machine. Not a person. Just a thing that drives the bus. And somewhere along the way, I started doing the same thing to other people. I started looking at passengers and deciding who was worth my respect and who was not. And that is... He stopped. That is exactly what was done to me. The coffee shop hummed around them. The barista frothed milk. A spoon clinked against a ceramic cup. Morning traffic passed outside the window in a soft, constant murmur. Keanu was quiet for a long moment after Gary finished speaking. Then he asked a question. When was the last time your daughter called you? Gary blinked. Of all the things he expected to hear, this was not one of them. 3 years, he said. 3 years and 2 months. What is her name? Megan. Keanu nodded slowly. He looked at his coffee cup, turning it in his hands. You said everything is falling apart, Keanu said. Your job, your reputation, your friendships, those things are real. But they are not the thing that is keeping you up at night. Gary stared at him. The thing keeping you up at night, Keanu continued, his voice so quiet that Gary had to lean forward to hear it, is that your daughter has not heard your voice in 3 years. And you are afraid that what she saw in that video is the only version of you she will ever remember. Gary's face collapsed, not slowly, all at once, like a dam that had held for years and finally gave way. The tears came again, harder than they had on his kitchen floor, because this time someone was watching. Someone was seeing him, not the video version, not the internet villain, the real Gary Hollister. The man who missed his daughter so badly it felt like a missing limb. You're not a bad person, Gary, Keanu said. Gary shook his head violently. You did not see what I was there, Keanu said gently. I know exactly what you did. And I'm telling you that one moment does not define a life. You are more than the worst thing you have ever done. How can you say that? Gary whispered. I grabbed you. On camera. In front of everyone. Yes, you did. And it was wrong. But I've been alive long enough to know that the people who cause pain are usually the ones carrying the most of it. Keanu paused. That does not excuse what you did, but it explains it. And understanding is the first step towards something better. Gary wiped his eyes with both hands. His breathing was ragged. What do I do now? I do not know how to fix any of this. Keanu leaned back in his chair and looked at Gary with an expression that carried no judgment. Only clarity. You asked me to forgive you. I do. That is done. But my forgiveness is not what you need. Then what do I need? Call your daughter. Gary flinched as if Keanu had reached across the table and touched a wound. Call Megan, Keanu repeated. Not because she deserves a call. Maybe she does. Maybe she does not. I do not know your story. But call her because you deserve to be her father again. The coffee shop fell quiet. Or maybe it did not. Maybe the world continued exactly as it was, and it was only the space between two men at a small table that changed. But to Gary, in that moment, everything stopped. And one more thing, Keanu said. Gary looked at him. There's a place on Skid Row. The Cornerstone Center. They feed people 3 days a week. They are always short on volunteers. He paused. Go there. Not for the cameras. Not for your reputation. Go there and look at the people you serve. Look them in the eye. Learn their names. Because the thing you did to me on that bus, you did because you forgot that every person has a story, including the ones who look like they do not belong. Keanu stood up. He placed a $20 bill on the table for both their coffees, though Gary had not ordered anything. He picked up his duffel bag and his worn paperback. I withdrew any complaint against you yesterday, Keanu said. I also called the transit authority and asked them to give you a second chance. Suspension with counseling. Not termination. Gary stared at him. You what? Everybody deserves a chance to be better than their worst day, Keanu said. This is yours. He nodded once. The same quiet nod he had given Dorothy on the bus. Then he walked out of Rosewood Coffee into the Franklin Avenue morning and disappeared into the crowd. Gary sat at the table for a very long time. The barista came by twice to ask if he wanted anything. He did not answer. He was staring at the empty chair across from him, replaying a single sentence in his mind. Call her, because you deserve to be her father again. At 11:14 that morning, Gary Hollister picked up his phone, opened his contacts, and pressed a name he had not pressed in 3 years and 2 months. It rang 4 times. He almost hung up. His thumb hovered over the end call button, trembling. Then a voice answered. A voice he had not heard in over 1,000 days. Dad. Gary pressed the phone against his ear and closed his eyes. The word hit him like a wave hitting a seawall. A wall that had held for so long it had forgotten it could break. Megan, he said, and then he could not say anything else because the word took everything out of him. The line was silent for a moment. Then Megan spoke again, and her voice was smaller than he remembered. Younger, like the voice of the girl who used to ride on his shoulders at the county fair. I saw the video, Dad. I know. Are you okay? Gary's breath caught. She was asking if he was okay. After everything. After the video. After 3 years of silence. She was asking about him. No, he said honestly. I'm not okay. But I'm trying to be. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. They did not resolve everything. They did not fix 3 years of silence in a single phone call. But they started. They started with I am sorry and I miss you, and the long, honest pauses of 2 people who wanted to find their way back to each other but had forgotten the map. When Gary hung up, he sat in a coffee shop for another 10 minutes. Then he typed an address into his phone. The Cornerstone Center, Skid Row, Tuesday volunteer shift, 5:30 a.m. He showed up the next Tuesday before dawn. The Cornerstone Center was a low concrete building on a street where hope went to negotiate with reality. The walls were painted a faded yellow that had once been cheerful. The inside smelled like industrial coffee and floor cleaner and something else, something warm and human and complicated. The volunteer coordinator was a man named James Bridwell, 60 years old, former Marine, tattoos on both forearms, silver beard, eyes that had seen everything and still chose to be kind. You, Gary? James asked, looking him up and down. Yes, sir. Done this before? No. Can you take orders without arguing? Gary almost smiled. Almost. I spent 4 years in the Army. I could take orders. Army, huh? James studied him for a moment longer. Good. Serving line. You scoop eggs. You do not talk unless someone talks to you first. And when someone looks you in the eye, you look right back. Not through them. Not past them. At them. Understood. Understood. Gary stood behind the serving line for 3 hours. He scooped eggs onto plastic trays. He poured orange juice into paper cups. He said, "Here you go," and "Good morning," and tried, for the first time and longer than he could remember, to see the people in front of him as people. An old man with one arm came through the line. He held his tray awkwardly, struggling to balance it. Gary reached across and steadied it for him without thinking. The man looked up and smiled. A real smile. Gap-toothed and genuine. "Thank you, brother," the man said. The word brother hit Gary somewhere he did not expect. He nodded quickly and turned away before anyone could see his eyes. A woman with 2 small children came through next. The children were quiet and clean, their shoes held together with tape. The woman did not make eye contact. She stared at the tray as Gary placed eggs on it. "Good morning," Gary said. She looked up, surprised, as if she had not expected to be spoken to. "Good morning," she whispered back. That exchange, those 4 words, cracked something open in Gary Hollister that all the counseling sessions and sleepless nights had not reached. He realized, standing behind that counter with a serving spoon in his hand, that he had stopped saying good morning to people years ago. On the bus, at the grocery store, in his building. He had stopped greeting people because greeting people requires seeing them. and seeing them requires acknowledging that they are real, that they have lives and fears, and children with taped-up shoes. And Gary had stopped wanting to know any of that, because knowing made the loneliness worse. But here, behind this counter, something was different. He was not invisible. He was not furniture with a serving spoon. He was a man handing another human being a plate of food, and for 3 seconds their eyes met, and both of them were real. An older man came through the line, maybe 70, wearing a threadbare suit jacket over a flannel shirt. His hand shook as he held the tray. Gary noticed that the man's collar was buttoned all the way to the top, even though it was 80 degrees outside. A small act of dignity. A refusal to let the street take everything. Gary placed eggs on his tray and added an extra scoop without being asked. "Thank you kindly," the man said, tipping an imaginary hat. "You are welcome, sir," Gary replied. The word sir surprised him. He had not called a stranger sir since the army. By the end of the 3-hour shift, Gary had served 114 people. He knew this because he counted, not out of obligation, out of something closer to wonder. 114 human beings with 114 stories, and for 18 years he had been driving past them every day in a bus and never once thought about where they were going. Gary went back the following Thursday, and the Tuesday after that, and the Thursday after that. On his 4th visit, James Bridwell pulled him aside. "You are not what I expected," James said. "What did you expect?" "I expected a man doing penance, checking a box, going through the motions so he could tell the internet he had changed." James paused. "That is not what I see." "What do you see?" James looked at him for a long moment. "I see a man who is starting to remember what it feels like to be useful. Not because someone is watching, because it matters." Gary said nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. In the 2nd month, Megan came to visit. She drove down from San Francisco on a Saturday. They met at a diner in Burbank, a place Gary used to take her when she was little. They sat in a booth by the window and ordered pancakes and did not talk about the video or the internet or the 18 years on the number 7 bus. They talked about Megan's job. She was a veterinary technician. She talked about a 3-legged cat named Admiral who lived at the clinic and ruled every animal in the building with an iron paw. Gary laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in months, and the sound surprised both of them. "Dad," Megan said, pushing a piece of pancake around her plate. "What happened on that bus? I need you to know something." Gary braced himself. "That video was not the first time I saw that side of you," she said quietly. "The anger. The way you talk to people when you are frustrated. The way you shut down and push everyone away. I saw it growing up. Mom saw it. That is why she left. That is why I stopped calling." Gary's fork rested on the plate. He did not pick it up. "But something is different now," Megan continued. "Mom said you had been going to the shelter, that you were seeing a counselor, that you called her to apologize and you did not make excuses." She looked at him. "That is new. I met someone," Gary said, "on the bus. The man I—" He stopped. "The man I hurt. He told me to call you. He said I deserved to be your father again." Megan's eyes glistened. "He said that." Those were his exact words. Megan reached across the table and took her father's hand. It was the first time she had touched him in 3 years. Gary held her fingers like they were made of glass. "I'm not going to pretend everything is fixed," Megan said. "It is not. We have a long way to go. I know, but I am here, and I want to try." Gary nodded. He could not speak. The pancakes went cold. Neither of them cared. When the check came, Gary reached for it. Megan put her hand on his. "Dad, let me." It was such a small thing. A daughter paying for pancakes. But Gary understood what it meant. It meant she was choosing to be here. Not because she had to. Not because the internet told her to. Because somewhere underneath 3 years of silence and a lifetime of his anger, there was still something worth coming back to. They walked to the parking lot together. Megan opened the trunk of her car and pulled out a small wrapped box. "What is this?" Gary asked. "Open it." Inside was a coffee mug, white ceramic. On the side, in handwritten letters that Megan had painted herself, were 2 words. "New Start." Gary held the mug. He turned it in his hands the way Keanu had turned his coffee cup at Rosewood. Carefully. like it was made of something precious. I use it every morning now, he would later tell his counselor Robert. First thing I do, pour coffee in that mug. And I remember that my daughter drove 400 miles to give it to me. In the months that followed, Gary and Megan rebuilt their relationship one phone call at a time. Every Sunday evening, 7 o'clock. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes. Sometimes Megan just told him about Admiral the three-legged cat, and Gary laughed until his eyes watered. The conversations were not always easy. There were silences that stretched, subjects they circled around without touching, memories that hurt to revisit. But they kept calling. Every Sunday, 7 o'clock. Diane, Gary's ex-wife, called him once. They spoke for 19 minutes. She did not take him back. She did not apologize. But she said something that Gary wrote down on a piece of paper and taped to his bathroom mirror. You sound different, Gary. You sound like the man I married. 6 months passed. Gary Hollister returned to the Transit Authority after completing his counseling program. He was reassigned to Route 12, a quieter line that ran through residential neighborhoods. He accepted the assignment without complaint. He drove differently now. Not the route, the way he drove. He greeted every passenger who boarded. Good morning. Good afternoon. Welcome aboard. Small words that cost nothing and meant everything. He noticed things he had never noticed before. The woman who boarded every morning at the Fairfax stop and always sat in the same seat and always read the same tattered romance novel. The old man who got on at 3rd Street and tipped his hat to Gary every single day. The pair of middle school boys who argued about basketball stats with the kind of passion that adults reserve for mortgages and politics. One morning, a young woman boarded with mascara streaked down her face. She had been crying. She fumbled with her fare card, dropping it twice. Gary waited. He did not tap the steering wheel. He did not sigh. When she finally swiped the card, he said, "Take your time. We are in no rush." She looked at him with startled, wet eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I hope your day gets better," Gary said. And he meant it. He meant it the way he had not meant anything in years. The woman sat down and cried a little more, but quieter now. And when she got off at her stop, she looked back at Gary through the window and gave him a small wave. He waved back. This was the revolution. Not the speeches. Not the viral videos. Not the courtroom dramas. A bus driver waving at a sad woman through a window. A man who had forgotten how to be kind, remembering, one passenger at a time, what kindness felt like. He kept a photograph tucked into the visor above the driver's seat. Not a photograph of Keanu Reeves. A photograph of Megan, taken at the diner in Burbank, her face caught mid-laugh over a stack of pancakes. Beside it, taped to the visor, was a small piece of paper with 2 words written in his own handwriting. See faces. Every time Gary looked at it, he remembered why he had changed. Not because the internet shamed him. Not because he lost his job. Because a man on a bus looked at him with sad eyes and saw a father who had forgotten how to love. On a Tuesday in October, 6 months after the bus incident, Keanu Reeves walked into the Cornerstone Center at 5:30 in the morning. He wore his usual outfit, faded t-shirt, jeans, boots, his duffel bag over one shoulder. He approached the serving line, picked up a tray, and stood in line like everyone else. He did not announce himself. He did not bring cameras. He simply showed up the way he always did, quietly, without ceremony, because showing up was the point. Gary Hollister was working the serving line that morning. He had traded shifts with another volunteer specifically for Tuesdays because Tuesdays had become his anchor, the day that reminded him who he was trying to be. He was scooping eggs when a familiar face appeared on the other side of the counter. Gary froze. The serving spoon hovered over the tray. His hand began to tremble. Keanu looked at him. Their eyes met across the metal counter of a homeless shelter on Skid Row. The last time they had been this close, Gary's hand had been fisted in Keanu's collar. Scrambled or fried? Gary asked. His voice was steady. His hand was not. Keanu smiled. That same quiet smile. Scrambled. Please. Gary scooped the eggs onto the tray. His hand steadied as it moved. The motion was practiced now. Familiar. Meaningful. Thank you, Keanu said. You are welcome. Keanu moved down the line. He found a seat at a corner table beside the one-armed man Gary had helped on his first day. They ate together. They talked. The one-armed man showed Keanu something on a piece of paper, a drawing of a bird, and Keanu studied it with the same genuine attention he gave to everything. James Bridwell appeared at Gary's elbow. You know who that is? Yes, Gary said quietly. I know exactly who he is. He knew because 6 months ago, a man he had treated like garbage had looked at him with sadness instead of anger and asked about his daughter. And that single question had cracked open a life that had sealed itself shut. After the breakfast shift, Gary untied his apron and hung it on the hook by the kitchen door. When he turned around, Keanu was standing near the exit, duffel bag on his shoulder. They looked at each other across the dining hall. No cameras, no audience, no 37 million views. Just two men in a room that smelled like eggs and coffee and second chances. Gary walked toward him. He did not rehearse what he wanted to say. He had spent 6 months learning that the most important words are the ones you do not plan. I want you to know that I come here every Tuesday, Gary said. And I drive my route every day like it means something. Because it does. Because you showed me it does. Keanu listened. My daughter and I talk every week now, Gary continued. She is coming for Thanksgiving. First time in 4 years. His voice wavered but held. And I have been seeing a counselor. Twice a month. A man named Robert. He served in Iraq. He gets it. That is good, Keanu said simply. I do not deserve what you did for me, Gary said. Calling the transit authority. Dropping the complaint. Coming to that coffee shop when you had every reason to never look at my face again. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. Do you know why I ride the bus? Gary shook his head. Because on a bus, everyone is equal. The CEO and the dishwasher sit in the same seat. The movie star and the student hold the same pole. A bus is one of the last places in the world where your money and your name do not matter. Just your fare. He paused. You forgot that, but you remembered. And that is all that matters. Gary extended his hand. Keanu took it. The handshake was firm and brief. Two men acknowledging something that words could not fully carry. I have one question, Keanu said. The counselor, Robert, is he helping? More than I can say. Keanu nodded. Good. Keep going. He adjusted his duffel bag, scratched behind the ear of a stray cat that had wandered in through the propped open back door, and walked out into the Skid Row morning. A reporter caught Keanu outside a studio lot the following week. She was young, eager, and had been waiting for an hour. Mr. Reeves, Gary Hollister, has reportedly returned to driving for the transit authority. He has been volunteering at a homeless shelter. He has reconnected with his estranged daughter. Do you have any comment? Keanu stopped walking. He turned to face her. The afternoon light caught the silver in his hair. I think people deserve the chance to be better than their worst moment. But he assaulted you. On camera. Many people feel he should have been punished more severely. Keanu considered this. Punishment tells a person what they did wrong, but it does not teach them how to do right. Gary needed someone to show him the door. He walked through it himself. Some would say you were too lenient, that you should have pressed charges to send a message. The message was already sent, Keanu said. 37 million people saw what happened on that bus. But only Gary's daughter saw what happened after. And her opinion is the only one that matters. The reporter paused, clearly moved despite her professionalism. There are people, Keanu continued, who believe that justice means making someone pay. An eye for an eye. A humiliation for a humiliation. I understand that. I do. But I've been alive long enough to know that the world does not get better through punishment. It gets better when someone decides to break the cycle. When someone looks at the person who hurt them and says, I see you. Not the worst version of you. The whole you. The you that existed before the anger took over. He paused. The reporter waited. Gary Hollister drove a bus for 18 years. 18 years. That is 6,500 days of getting up before dawn, driving the same route, dealing with passengers who never said thank you. That does not excuse what he did. Nothing excuses it, but it explains something. It tells you that the person who grabbed my collar was not born cruel. He was made that way by loneliness, by invisibility, by a world that treated him exactly the way he treated me. What would you say to people who have been treated the way you were on that bus? Judged for how they look, told they do not belong. Keanu was quiet for a moment. He looked past the reporter, past the studio lot, at the Los Angeles skyline, shimmering in the afternoon haze. I would say that your worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion of you. Not by the seat you sit in, not by the clothes you wear, not by whether someone with a name tag decides you deserve respect. He paused. Your worth comes from how you treat people when the world is not watching, and how you respond when someone tries to make you feel small. He adjusted his duffel bag. You cannot take a person's dignity. You can try. You can grab their collar and drag them down an aisle and tell them they do not belong. But dignity is not something others give you. It is something you carry, and nobody, not on a bus, not anywhere, can make you set it down unless you choose to. He paused one more time. And if you are the person who did the grabbing, if you're the one who looked at someone and decided they were less, it is not too late. It is never too late to sit down beside someone and see them for the first time. He nodded once and walked toward the parking lot where his motorcycle, clutch cable finally fixed, waited in the afternoon sun. He threw one leg over the seat, kicked the engine to life, and rode out onto Melrose Avenue. A month later, on a Sunday afternoon, Gary Hollister sat on his small balcony in Van Nuys. His daughter Megan sat beside him in a folding chair, her feet up on the railing. Between them, on a small plastic table, sat 2 cups of coffee and a piece of pumpkin pie they were sharing with a single fork. Below them, the neighborhood hummed with its usual Sunday sounds. A lawn mower, a dog barking, children riding bicycles down the sidewalk. "Dad," Megan said, taking the fork and cutting a piece of pie. "Can I ask you something? Anything. On the bus that day, when he was looking at you, what did you see in his face?" Gary was quiet for a long time. He watched a hummingbird hover near the neighbor's bougainvillea, its wings a blur of impossible speed. "I saw me," he said finally. "I saw a man looking at me the way I should have been looking at everyone. Like they mattered. Like they were real." He paused. "I had forgotten that people were real, Megan. I had been angry for so long that everyone became a category. Passengers. Problems. Inconveniences. I stopped seeing faces. And now," Gary looked at his daughter, at her dark hair that she got from her mother, at the small scar above her eyebrow from when she fell off her bicycle at age 6, and he carried her a quarter-mile to the emergency room, at the woman she had become while he was busy being furious at the world. "Now I see faces," he said, "and every single one of them is someone's daughter." Megan took his hand. They sat on the balcony and finished the pie and watched the sun go down over Van Nuys. The sky turned gold, then copper, then the deep bruised purple of a Los Angeles evening. A car alarm went off somewhere down the block and then stopped. A dog barked twice and fell silent. The hummingbird returned to the bougainvillea, hovered for a moment, and then disappeared into the twilight. "Dad," Megan said, "Yeah, that man on the bus. Keanu Reeves. He asked you to call me." "He did. Why do you think he did that?" "Out of everything he could have said, he could have lectured you. He could have told you what a terrible person you were. He could have listed all the reasons you should be ashamed. But instead he asked about me." Gary thought about this for a long time. The pumpkin pie was gone. Only crumbs remained on the plate, and the fork lay across it, catching the last light. "Because he knew," Gary said slowly, "that the problem was not what I did on that bus. The problem was who I had become off the bus. The anger, the loneliness, the way I pushed everyone away because it hurt less than letting them in." He saw all of that in about 30 seconds. "Ow!" I think because he has been there. Not in the same way, but in his own way. He knows what it is like to lose people, to sit alone, to feel like the world keeps moving and you are standing still." Gary paused. He did not look at me and see a villain. He looked at me and saw a father who was drowning. And instead of pushing me under, he threw me a rope. Megan squeezed his hand. That is the thing about kindness, Gary said, and his voice carried a weight that told Megan these were words he had been turning over for months. Real kindness. Not the kind you post about. Not the kind you do for cameras. The kind where you sit down in a coffee shop across from a man who grabbed your collar and you ask him about his daughter. That kind of kindness does not just change one person. It changes everyone that person touches for the rest of their life. He looked at Megan. He changed me so I could change the way I talk to you. So I could change the way I treat the people on my bus. So I could change the way that woman with the mascara on her face felt when she got on at Fairfax. He paused. One act, and it rippled outward like a stone in a lake. That is what real kindness does. Megan leaned her head against her father's shoulder. The last light faded. The balcony grew dark. Neither of them moved to turn on a light. Somewhere across the city, Keanu Reeves rode his motorcycle through Topanga Canyon, the wind carrying the scent of sage and eucalyptus. His dog Biscuit was at home, probably asleep on the couch. His worn copy of Rilke was in the duffel bag strapped to the back of the bike. Tomorrow he would be on a film set. Tonight, he was just a man on a road. He had not thought about the bus incident in weeks. Not because it did not matter, because it had done what it needed to do. It had cracked open a man who had sealed himself shut. It had reconnected a father and a daughter. It had reminded 37 million people that the way you treat a stranger is the truest measure of who you are. And somewhere on Skid Row, Wallace, the former math teacher, was wearing a pair of black motorcycle boots and volunteering at the Cornerstone Center 3 days a week. He helped with the books, kept inventory, taught a small math class for kids whose parents used a shelter. He told every class the same story on the first day, about a man who sat down beside him on a sidewalk and gave him his shoes and asked nothing in return, about how that single act of kindness reminded him that he was still a teacher, even without a classroom. And somewhere in San Francisco, Gary Hollister was wrapping a Christmas gift for her father, a leather-bound journal. Inside the front cover, she had written a single line in her small, careful handwriting. For the dad I am getting to know again. And somewhere on a bus in Los Angeles, Route 12, a driver named Gary Hollister was helping an elderly woman with a walker board through the front doors. He held her arm gently. He waited until she was seated. He made sure her walker was secure before pulling away from the curb. "Thank you, young man," the woman said. Gary smiled. "You're welcome, ma'am." The bus moved forward. Keanu leaned into a curve, the motorcycle humming beneath him, and somewhere in the dying light he smiled. Not because the world was fixed. It was not. But because somewhere in Van Nuys, a man and his daughter were sharing pumpkin pie on a balcony. Because somewhere on Skid Row, a math teacher was teaching fractions again. Because somewhere on Route 12, a bus driver was saying good morning and meaning it. And that was enough. That was always enough. Because the measure of a life is not what you take from a world. It is not the seat you sit in. It is not the uniform you wear or the authority you hold or the name people know you by. The measure of a life is what you give to the stranger sitting next to you. The coffee you share. The boots you leave behind. The phone call you make after 3 years of silence. The 2 words that cost nothing and change everything. Good morning. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.